Seth, happy Friday, buddy.
Happy Friday to you. It's good to be back. Welcome,
Yeah,
welcome back to the West Coast. How's everything with you?
that's well, thank you, man. Thank you for the welcome back. It's been a while. I want to say to our audience, I apologize, but I was doing some actually research, a music research road trip. Seth, as you know, I was out visiting my brother who lives in North Carolina, but I happened to take a little road trip down south, deep south, to Leonard Skinner country in North Florida.
Very nice. Very nice.
So will tell you a really quick story. So I'm a big Leonard Skinner fan. Obviously, growing up in Southern California, right? The Southern lifestyle really, was very relevant. But I went to Jacksonville, and they actually grew up in West Jacksonville, and I went to their where Ronnie Van Sant is buried in this place, Riverside Memorial Park. And I walked in the mortuary, and the lady looks at me and she goes, "You're here to see Ronnie Van Sant." And I go, "Yes." I go, "Wow, okay." She's like, "We get people from around the world every week that come here. Probably like single dudes like myself, right?"
Yeah, people have a
And
little time on their hands. Yeah. But still,
yeah. So she walked me down to where, in fact, there's a couple members that are actually buried there, and that's where they grew up in that area of town. So it was really cool to see. But I got to tell you this quick. So one of my favorite songs from them is called "Gimme Three Steps." And for those of you, it's a very classic Leonard Skinner song. And the opening lines are, "I was cutting the rug down at a place called the Jug with a girl named Linda Lou." And I had been obsessed with the song since I was a kid. And I finally went to the bar called the Jug.
really,
And
that's cool.
it's a biker bar, right? And so I went there, and there were these guys kind of with their Harleys out front. And there I was in my red sweats and like a turquoise shirt. And I was like, okay, I'm just going to kind of pull up.
Poke my head in, get out. Yeah.
Just took a picture and I was out. Anyways, so, but the funny thing about Leonard Skinner is when most people a little bit older probably remember is that their big logo, or they're kind of like a part of their whole, let's say,
Aesthetic.
branding, yeah,
Yeah.
aesthetic iconography is the Confederate flag, which listen, I don't have a comment on that per se. They've since kind of migrated to an American flag, but it really led kind of, Seth, you and I were talking about this today's topic, which is bands and the power of like their logo, their typography, their iconography, their design, if you will. And you and I, being in the marketing business, know the power of branding, right? You see a Coca-Cola can, right? The red and
Absolutely.
white.
You can't spell brand without band, Scott. You got to remember that. This is a critical. I
There you
mean,
go.
and I don't think it's an accident that some of the most iconic artists, bands, musicians over time also have a very identifiable either logo or set of logos or just things that visually, like maybe even the common person wouldn't recognize members of the band in pictures, but they know the logos. Oftentimes it becomes interwoven with the sound, the visual. It's all part of a total package. And most of these logos are very thoughtfully created to evoke that. Some just gained it over time,
Yeah.
but there's no question that especially in a time when there wasn't, YouTube where you go watch like there were only a certain number of visual cues you had of a band and what kind of you associated them with.
Mm-hmm.
So back in the even like 70s, 80s, the logo was really important to the identity of the band outwardly to fans. So that's what we want to dig into today, the importance of branding in general, why it's so important for bands, and then talk about some of the most iconic bands, logos, iconography that we've seen over time. So does
Definitely.
that feel like the right move to
That
you?
that that is why I agree with the agenda, that marketing agenda.
Yeah, I know.
I
I'm still in work mode here on Friday. Let's talk through our
Okay,
agenda.
Seth, topic number one,
Yeah.
the history of branding. Well, what I thought was interesting when talking about band logos is at the very beginning of rock, let's just per se, with Elvis and even the Beatles, it didn't seem to be that much of a strategic play. For example, if I said, "Show me the logo for Elvis, his first couple albums," I don't think anyone would be able to draw it.
Yeah. Yeah. And same thing with the Beatles. I know like it is iconic now, but that kind of the drumhead logo, that's just the long T, that was not ever on any of their albums until Past Masters, which is like
Yeah.
came out in the 90s, which is the first time they trademarked it. So it wasn't, like you said, it wasn't a priority until probably the late 60s, when it very quickly, I think bands realized as they grew nationally the importance of kind of being distinct. And it was a time of
Yeah.
creativity, like the late 60s were a time of artistic creativity. And I think that extended through to graphic design as well, which is crazy to say. Well, you know, we talk constantly about the Beatles, but even before then, the like album covers were very basic. It was like the font wasn't particularly important. It was a picture of the four guys in the band, maybe with their instruments, and that's it. And very quickly that became an art form of, you know, whether it's images, whether it's symbols, and part of that came logos. And so you really see the first boom of that in the sort of second half of the 60s, I would say.
And that's it's interesting because maybe they looked at it very functionally. Like, here's Elvis. We want to show him. We're just going to put a name on it, and let's just get it out there, as opposed to this coherent or conceptual vision of the name, the artwork, how you open the album. And I think we saw probably with Sgt. Pepper's, even though they didn't really have an identifiable font, but this idea of, okay, this is now art and music in a product form. And I think you started to see in that late 60s, early 70s, hiring almost artists, graphic artists, to visually represent, okay, like for example, here's the Grateful Dead. Here is this vision of what we want the band to be.
And I wonder, I'm curious your thoughts, Scott. I didn't really touch on it, but do you think some of the emergence of logos and have it being like a central piece of it was just that like marketing was getting better? Like, you know what I mean? Like I'm thinking almost of like Mad Men, the timing of that, the importance of branding in general, whether it's for Coca-Cola or whether it's for the Rolling Stones. I feel like that hyper branded culture didn't really emerge until that same time as well. It's almost like those bands were following the wave of what was happening more broadly. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think you always had, I think as marketing got sophisticated, they started to realize I don't know, it's just the power of colors, the power of consistent communication, and the idea that you could convey a feeling with the shape of the letters.
Yep.
You know, for example, I thought a good example was the band Yes, the prog rock band, right, from the UK. Their first two albums had very generic fonts. There was no real direction. Then they brought on someone. The band actually said, "Hey, you know," they wanted to have everything convey or evoke this sense of new arty, very progressive style of the whole concert experience as well as the album experience. And so they have that very famous, almost billowy type, cloudy looking symbol that just now has gone on, and they just kept it. And that's what I saw in that early 70s. Yeah. Even bands like Led Zeppelin, they came onto this design. They said, that's it. Okay, that's the band. So I think it was a mix of that progression of marketing, I won't say analytics, but just realizing it works, as well as the music became a little more adventurous.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely right. And I think, you know, early on, you see a lot of bands, it's almost like they've got a bunch of different logos or different typefaces or whatever. And then like eventually they coalesce around one, and then that becomes the iconic thing. And we're not even mentioning the implication here of like, which I think maybe came about later more, but the money to be made from the merchandising side of things of these logos, right? Like, I mean, that's another thing. People weren't buying like band shit until the Beatles, when it's like there was dolls, there was lunchboxes, there was all these things. Suddenly there was an opportunity to add a new revenue stream by merchandising and by building a strong brand, logos, etc., that allows you to much more easily merchandise and have people basically like wear your band as a symbol of their personality, and also be like your walking billboard, right? So there was a benefit to on both sides, financially and brand growth wise.
Definitely. What I think is most interesting, if you look at that early 70s band, the biggest artists at the time, Crosby, Stills and Nash, Elton John, even Bruce Springsteen, I can't identify a logo from them, a symbol or anything that is something on a shirt without their name. You could be like, yep, that's the typeface of so and so.
Yeah.
I thought it was actually heavy metal, or these, like almost like the metal genre was the leader of this. Okay, this, if you have this font, you're a metal band, and
Yep.
anything around it. And I think they're probably the most innovative to convey their, to their audience of who they are. Like if you had a band name, I don't know, it could be water bottle, some random thing. But if you put it with the Metallica tile font, it's like, oh, it's a metal company. It's a
Yeah.
metal band.
Totally. And I think Metallica was almost like, that's a good example of like, you could write, truly, you could write the word water bottle in the Metallica
Yeah.
font, and you'd know, oh, that's the Metallica font. Like, it's been parodied and memed so many times. You can write anything with it, and it just kind of is either ironically funny or whatever. But that, I totally agree. That world of metal now, it's almost like everybody's got the same logo that's like
Mhm.
lightning, it's like every band kind of, like if you look at, we should post it. Like I saw one, it was a bill of like a metal festival.
Yeah.
And so it's like 30 band logos, and they all look the fucking exactly the same.
Yeah,
Different words that you can
exactly.
like almost unreadable. But
Yeah.
I agree that has become, unlike, I would almost say that the music logos for artists today are less important than they used to be in
Yeah.
iconography, except for in metal, where it's like a central tenet of who you are.
Yeah. You
Right? I think
cannot
that's true.
have a Avenir font or a let's say Times New Roman font for a metal band, right? You have
Yeah.
to have the logo look like it hurts if you touch it. It's
Yes.
got
It
barbed
needs to be
wire,
loud. It needs
it's
to be
got
electric. It
thorns.
needs to be violent. It needs to be like disorienting almost. Yeah, that's part of
And
it.
I remember as a kid, the way, funny enough, when I look back, the bands I used to write were the ones I didn't even like them, but they had logos that you could copy. For example, Ozzy Osbourne, Van Halen, Styx, Led Zeppelin, even the Aerosmith with the wheel. These were some that were just so much fun to copy. But what I read in this research set, this is really funny. The one who was the, let's say, the pioneer in this branding was Chicago.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they got a lot of heat because the industry said it looked too corporate,
Yeah.
which is
I mean,
funny
it
because,
almost looks like the Coca-Cola logo with the big
yeah,
swooping C.
it
Like, I
does.
see people's point, but, and they were one of the few bands we talked about, maybe logos came later or they kind of weren't used and they emerged. Chicago had their Chicago script logo on every
Yep.
album
Yep.
from Chicago Transit Authority. From the first one, it was in some way, shape, or form on every album they ever made.
Yep.
And I think that is a way to build consistency. And it feels very like tight and organized, kind of like the band is, right? Like,
Yep.
say what you want about Chicago, but they're incredibly um tight musically, and I think that
Yep.
logo sort of speaks to that.
Yeah, it's, and some I think stick. You'll see bands even like Steely Dan. They'll have very unique logos. Their typefaces for each album that mimic somewhat of the personality of the album.
Yeah.
Even like Motley Crue with their Theater of Pain, it was very glammy at the time. And then before they had their what do you call it? Shout at the Devil, which was a little more evil looking. So that's what I've seen more typically is they'll put the theme, but the logo changes,
Yes.
which I thought was kind of interesting too. It's a way to show evolvement. I think what
Evolution.
the evolution, but I honestly feel the best ones are the ones that just don't change, just
Yeah.
like a brand.
But think of how hard that is to do, right? Like there's so many, especially with font, but even logo, it's like tastes change over time. What, like stuff that you can, if you see a font from the 80s, you're like, oh God, that's so 80s looking, right? So to design
Yeah,
something that's truly iconic that can be around for 50 years and people still wear proudly, that's a rare achievement, I think. And I think that's why the ones we'll touch on, a lot of those check that box where they just like they're fairly timeless,
and I
So
would say one of the, I don't want to offend any Kiss fans out there, but a band that I just think has the worst music, but scores the highest on marketing is Kiss,
yeah.
who have anyone can copy that logo. It had this mystery behind it. When I was a kid, they said it was kids in service of Satan.
Yeah,
That's what.
Knights in Satan's service.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Knights Saints.
I know people were also angry because those S's have an unintentional similarity to like Nazi SS, like
Yeah,
police logo, which I think Paul Stanley from Kiss is the one that designed that Kiss logo,
yeah,
like the rough version of it. And he was very clear, like, no, I just wanted it to look cool. Like there was no deeper
yeah.
meaning. But I think for a band like that, that was so theatrical, a little bit of mystery around it, or like,
Mhm.
that's good for the brand, right? That
Oh
like
yeah.
people thinking it's
Oh,
bad or it's evil is like, that's good, actually. Did its job.
the other one, AC/DC. Their first album actually looks very almost like 90s or 60s. It has a very flowing font typeface. Then they came to the one that everyone knows, that very hard black and black, that very
Yeah.
spiky.
Do you know
Uh
they got that font from the Gutenberg Bible?
no.
The cover of the Gutenberg, that's where the AC/DC font is from. I just
That's
learned
a
that. And so
great.
great factor. They got it from the Gutenberg Bible, and then the name itself is off of their sister's sewing machine. So that's the
Really.
combination to get the iconography that is, again, with the lightning bolt in the middle. It's so simple,
So
but it's
simple.
immediately, and it looks, it's one of those, I don't even know how to explain it articulately, but it looks like the band sounds,
That's
right?
exactly.
Yeah.
I think that's a good insight. And when I was a kid, they thought it was Antichrist Devil's Children. This is what I thought was great about metal. They had the best mysterious names, secret messages. And I got to give props to my brother, who I just saw in North Carolina. He introduced me to the world of Iron Maiden, which is a mix of comic book characters mixed with Lord of the Rings and heavy metal. This whole world of a very, I mean, one of the best fonts you can ever imagine, with a character, an actual mascot,
Yes.
Eddie.
Eddie. Yeah. It was actually like, even when I was younger, I remember, this is such a specific memory, but I remember seeing Iron Maiden records on
Yeah.
the jukebox at Pizza Hut. And I remember legitimately like kind of being scared
Yeah.
of those album covers because they're so crazy looking. But
Oh,
then I found out his name was Eddie, and I'm like, oh, that's not scary anymore.
yeah.
Like that's the least scary thing.
It's
But I know they've even had like Eddies on stage. They had a giant
yeah.
one for one tour. Like it really has become central to the myth of the band. And another one where I think it's on every single album, I'm pretty sure.
It's really incredible to see you going from their first album in 1980, where you just see the complete, it's Eddie, it's a close-up portrait. Then they go to Killers and he's got a knife. Then they'll migrate him with the devil. Then he's in, it's a very smart branding play, because Eddie evolves with whatever country he's in. He can be in Brazil. He's wearing a thong. I
Yeah.
don't know.
You could be
He's
on
on
vacation.
he's
Yeah.
on vacation. Eddie in Manhattan. He's wearing his tie.
Mm-hmm.
Very, very smart merchandise of the shirts. You want to wear an Iron Maiden shirt because they just look so cool.
Yeah.
And I think bands like Led Zeppelin did a great job with that, with the symbols on their Led Zeppelin 4 album. They just have
Yeah.
symbols. Actually, nothing on it, but when you open it up, the actual album sleeve has every band member as a symbol.
Yeah, that was a bold decision. That album put out with, again, no, I've got,
Oh,
I think, 2 copies of it from you sitting in my bookshelf, but like there's no band logo, no
yeah,
name, no liner notes. And then you open it up and it's these like, and they're actually, you probably know more than I do, but they're like, um, they're from like a Wiccan book or something, or they're like, they all chose each guy chose their own logo that represents them in some way. And it's out of like a witchcraft book or something. I don't even know, but it's very Led Zeppelin. I'll say that. Very kind of,
it's such a unique experience. And Seth, we have to tell the audience here, when we were designing our company Mesh and Bone and we looked at logo,
yeah.
we took a little bit, I don't want to say Metallica, but we wanted to combine something very powerful. And there was inspiration with the M and how the whole uh, the letters connect. And
Yeah.
we got to give credit where credit's due.
Totally. And I can, another thing I'm thinking about that is the page we've got that's got like the 132 iterations.
Yeah,
And I could almost go through that and be like, that band's more of like a jazz band. You know what I
yeah.
mean? Like each one of them have such a different feel. And we eventually found the one we wanted, but you can see how the same name presented a different way can be a completely different like vibe or sound or feeling. which is why, again, these are the ones we're going to talk about have stuck so well. So,
and so what are some of the symbols? We've talked a lot about the typefaces, but just like the Nike logo with the swoosh, bands also have a symbol.
Yeah. And
And
I think I think
a lot
most
of them.
there's a lot of them. But again, a hard thing to sort of distill. How do you distill a band sound down into like an image? And I think the ultimate example is definitely the Rolling Stones tongue image. The lips and tongue. I know, I was just reading, it was the guy who designed it, who was like an art student, met Mick Jagger, and he's like, the first thing you notice when you meet this guy that you can't stop thinking about is how huge his lips are and how big his mouth is. And so it's so, because he's the front of the band. And then it was combined with like some like Hindu imagery or something, like inspiration, but that's the core of it. And when you see it, it's immediately identifiable. It's a little bit like edgy. It feels like sexual, right? Which the band kind of is, but not too much. You can put it on a t-shirt and wear it to the mall. And again, 50 years later, they're still using that pretty heavily in album covers, and it really is pretty synonymous with them. They're a band that's got a few logos, but that one was actually designed for their record label, Rolling Stones Records, not for the band. But that's one that encapsulates so simply a band's look, sound, vibe, everything. It was brilliant design.
And this is another interesting story. I was just in Jacksonville last week, and I started looking at some of their concerts, and they opened up for the Rolling Stones in Nebworth in 1975. And here you have a battle of two logos. On the back, you have the Confederate flag, which was Lynyrd Skynyrd's de facto symbol, right? This was something they put up on every concert they had. And they were like, we're a Southern band, and this is the South, and this is who we are, right? They adopted that. It was basically stealing equity from a war. And they were told by the Rolling Stones manager, do not step on the tongue. Like when you're on stage, do not step on, I don't know how, where it was rearranged.
Yeah, it was printed on like a banked stage. I can picture it. Like it was on the floor. Yeah. That's just like, people, the big thing is like, don't step on the star of the Dallas Cowboys logo on the field. That's like disrespectful. It's the exact same thing, right?
Yeah. Exactly. And so Ronnie Van Sant gets up there and steps on it, which I thought was cool. But this is some of the pitfalls or the risk when you do branding. Lynyrd Skynyrd now has replaced the Confederate flag, which for obvious reasons, and now their branding is an American flag. So there's something where it didn't
got to evolve with the times.
Yeah, or it's a big risk if you're going to choose something. In this case, it was kind of a weird bet, but
I would say that's a classic like different times one though. Like I've seen them interviewed about it, and they don't seem contrite. They were more like, we weren't thinking about it as like people do now when it's like a symbol of hate. They're like, we get it, and that's why we changed it. But we were just like, we're from the South. We kind of want to have a symbol that represents that, and that's where they landed. But so things do evolve.
Another one, a shirt that you'll see, the Ramones. Now, this one, I don't know. What does it say on it? Is it just the names of the?
It's their four names. And I was just reading about it. So it's their four names. It's a modified presidential symbol. The president of the United States, that seal. And then it's got their name around it. Instead of olive branch, it's apple branches, because they're like, the band is American as apple pie. And then one of their members, I think Markey, was like obsessed with baseball. So the Eagles, instead of arrows, is holding a baseball bat, which is like, it's representative of the band, but also is like kind of badass. So that's a logo that, like, again, I feel like you see like, grandmas with t-shirts that they maybe don't even know what the band really is, but it's so iconic that it's a fashion thing now. You know what I mean? It's evolved beyond the band even.
Well, the other one is the Who, which for a time they were the ultimate mod band, and the mod symbol they adopted from I believe it was the fighter planes, the English Army or the English naval.
Red and blue bullseye. The shape and the colors were kind of evocative of that, and that's another one that feels very 60s to me, but it has stood the test of time, right?
Definitely. And some of the older ones in metal, I think, are the Guns N' Roses with the cross and their faces. And the skulls.
That Appetite for Destruction album cover, right? Like that is a piece of, It's an icon. I don't know that those characters really came back, but that's sort of that stylized logo with the literal Guns and Roses part of it
Yeah.
is something that still pops up today and is very associated with them.
And we obviously talked about Metallica, which to me, one of the best logos ever made, just in general.
Yeah.
The M and the A, it's just it's genius, and it just immediately you put that on anything, and it has that tone. But there were some others here that I thought were not necessarily consistent, but the Grateful Dead, I think in terms of merchandise, Seth, these guys were pioneers. The way they let the community create iconography, create design, and there's so many different characters in that world.
Yeah. They have not one iconic logo, but they've got like 6. They've got all these different permutations. You hit the nail on the head as to the why they've kind of spread so much. Is they're really, really in the same way that they're visionary around like record our music, share it. We know that's just going to be good for us. All of the people who were selling bootleg Grateful Dead merchandise, messing with it in different ways, different colors, different contexts, like grew the legacy of the band, and they were just cool. The actual that they call like the Steal Your Face skull was designed by Owsley Stanley, who's the LSD guy. And then you've got the Dancing Bears, which was off another one of their albums. Yeah. But now you can buy they do licensing deals with everybody. You can buy Grateful Dead coffee. You can buy Grateful Dead Nike shoes. You can buy Grateful Dead their licensing is insane, but you don't do that until you have 50 years of building the equity of those different designs, right? They've got the skeletons, the bears, the skull, and I'm sure there's even some I'm forgetting, but they're immediately identifiable, and you can stick them on anything. They're the kings of merchandising, which is funny because they're so they're in some ways they're so counterculture, but in some ways they're so savvy, and it's a very interesting contrast.
I thought exactly. And when I was started going to the Dead shows, people, you can almost identify the people and what stage they were in their fandom, if you will, or what eras they like. There's a Shakedown Street, this guy in a zoot suit, which is this whole disco Dead, where the people wanted more of the Steal Your Face, or people that like the Dancing Bears. Like, it's like, get to pick which part of the world you like. And how they for example, the Cubs, if the Cubs were real, they would have the Cubs logo within, or the Giants within the Grateful Dead Steal Your Face. So there's like collabs. They're so smart.
They do. They're brilliant at that. Like co-branding stuff, licensed stuff. It's constantly evolving. And I can tell you the lot culture piece is still alive and well. I went to a Dead and Company show maybe 2 years ago. I bought one of my favorite t-shirts I have is a $5 bootleg Dead and Company t-shirt that I bought in California. I love it. And it's just like some random dude designed it, because once you have all the elements, you have these core tenets, you can get really creative with them really quickly. So they're the kings of that for sure.
Well, let me ask you a couple questions here before we go. What shirt what's your favorite band logo shirt? You have one shirt you're going to wear. What's it going to be?
Oh, let me think here. Some of them are so, I never answer these questions straight. Some of them are so prevalent. It probably would be a Dead one. It's a short answer. Just because I like them, and I just think you can do a lot of creative stuff with it. Some of them are so common now that it's almost like, again, let's see which one I'll use as an example. Like the tongue, right? That's so prevalent that you can buy them at the Gap, you can buy them at Target. It's almost like, that's not cool anymore. And I guess you could argue the same thing for the Dead. So I'm messing with my own point. But some of them are so iconic, they're almost like you want to find something a little more like underground. You want to find something. What would your answer be? Would it be because love of the band, or would it be because purely love of the logo?
To me, it's the logo and the simplicity. But I thought Run DMC with the 2 red lines kind of stacked.
Oh yeah,
I thought it was so simple, and I thought the like Run DMC, just like Run, right? It just was such a unique name, and I thought at the time the music was so new when I was a kid. I just thought it was the coolest logo, name, colors, simple, but I was just not cool enough to wear it, man.
I was gonna say the only problem with wearing band merch is that then you got to answer questions about the band.
Yeah,
The whole
yeah,
internet joke where it's okay, oh, you love Metallica, name three
yeah.
of their songs or
Oh,
whatever.
jeez.
So
Oh,
you got to
yeah.
be able to back it up if you put it on, in my opinion.
Okay.
So that would be my only take.
Last question here. What would be the worst typeface for a band you like, but that can throw it off?
Oh, there's only one answer. It's obviously Comic Sans, right? Like it's like there's so many silly fonts, but comics, it's like no band could be taken seriously. No way that something could be made cool in that way. So unless you're doing it so ironically, but you really need to embrace the bit.
See, I think if you had the Carpenters in a Metallica font or some type of metal font,
I would buy that. I would buy that. That's brilliant.
See, I think that would, if you had Karen, Karen and the other is her brother, Richard Carpenter, and but just some way where you maybe can play with the colors and just have the Carpenters with those either barbed wire or thorns.
I think you need to get on this. I think this is your calling, Scott, for sure.
Think about even what flags you could have for Leonard Skinner. Maybe we're not going to go there, but
maybe those days are gone, unfortunately.
But no, I think that I always thought that would be a funny T-shirt having Neil Diamond and some type of metal font. But,
see, this is a cottage industry. We got it. Maybe we start our own fashion line here.
That's right.
Couture by D-Side Stories. Yeah.
And everyone, let us know if there is a design. The technology is here, everyone. So send us any designs. Seth and I will look at, and I'm going to say this to Seth right now. If you and I like something, we'll make the shirt and send it back to you.
Yeah, that's like your favorite hobby is making cool shirts. So we'll take advantage of your vision.
This logo here. I mean, this has got to be one of the coolest logos.
Iconic. Truly
iconic. You don't even need to put side stories on it. Just the D.
Just show them the D. Exactly.
There's our tagline. Well, hey, everyone. Thanks so much for your patience. As I mentioned, Seth, thank you for your patience. I was out. I was in a Dodge Challenger cruising around the deep south.
American muscle. Okay.
It was pretty cool. But hey, everyone have a fantastic weekend. Again, we want to say thank you. Send us your designs and we'll put them up on social media.
Definitely. That sounds like a great idea. All right, Scott. Have a wonderful weekend.
See you guys.
Bye.
Bye-bye.